right, good afternoon everyone. My apologies that I couldn't be here with you earlier today, but I've actually been out at Mount Druitt talking with families about a new approach we're taking and adopting, with thanks to our colleagues in South Australia, the family by family approach, and we're trialling that at the Druitt. So it was an important event for me to be at in terms of my commitment to that community. But firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, the Gadigal people, and as always for us that's not just a culturally appropriate recognition, but it's also very topical for the work that we do, because Aboriginal people remain the most disadvantaged citizens in our community when it comes to meeting their housing needs. I've got a number of things to talk to today, and I've got some notes to make sure I don't leave anything out. And I'm happy to take any questions if that's appropriate, Leonie, in the course of the program, because I would have normally been presenting some of this stuff to you at the earlier end of the day. But I'd like to especially take this opportunity on behalf of HMAC, and as Leonie indicated, I still have the pleasure and privilege of chairing that group, to thank everyone here today for your involvement in the development of the National Regulatory System for Community Housing. Members of the National Regulatory System Consultative Forum have provided significant advice and input at crucial points in the development of the system, which has resulted in a more robust and effective system. So thank you. The development of the National Regulatory System has been the culmination. Now, it doesn't seem that long ago, but it's close to 3 years worth of work. And has been the result of a great deal of cooperation and goodwill between governments and stakeholders from across all jurisdictions and the community housing sector right across our wonderful country. As many of you would recall, the National Regulatory System was part of a suite of reforms agreed to by state and territory and Commonwealth governments as part of the National Affordable Housing Agreement. I'm particularly proud that New South Wales has led the development of the National Regulatory System and acknowledge the fantastic work of Leonie and her team in leading that work for us. I'd have to be honest and say I get a great deal of credit for that work, but the old adage, behind every good man, well, behind me there's some number of very good women that actually make me look better than I deserve to, and Leonie really should get all of that credit. But I am particularly proud that we've been able to lead this work. It is a major reform. Any national regulatory change is a significant reform. But this particular reform should provide assurance to all stakeholders, but particularly investors, both government and financiers. And we do get asked questions from time to time by the finance sector and by government, is this a safe and a prudent sector for us to invest in? So that assurance is really quite critical. But we can give that assurance confidently now that the community housing sector is viable, it is well governed and it is well managed, something all of you know, but we actually need to be able to demonstrate that quite effectively both to government and financiers. But the system should pave the way for future housing product development. It should also reduce the regulatory burden on housing providers, working across jurisdictions particularly, and provide a level playing field for providers seeking to enter new jurisdictions. And Mark Francis, I think Queensland are trying to pinch a few of all of our providers, given the challenge in front of Queensland. But we're here to help you in any way we can, Mark. But my real job today, seriously, is to respond to the Phase 1 evaluation conducted by Michael Brooks from ARTD. And again, I'd like to acknowledge the extensive work that Michael's done in the development of the Phase 1 evaluation process and the report. I'd also like to acknowledge, importantly, and thank the Phase 1 providers, some of whom are present with us today, and have already provided their reflections in the previous sessions. And I'd also like to thank John for his reflections from a CEO's perspective. These providers volunteered their time and their resources to participate in the testing and evaluation phase of the National Regulatory System. and their contribution was absolutely vital in refining and resolving any systems or procedural issues prior to the full commencement of the system on the 1st of January next year, a date looming large and importantly for all of us. But I am pleased to note that the report states that there were no critical or systemic flaws identified by Phase 1. It provides that the guidelines and procedures for registration are fit for purpose. However, the report does provide details on possible areas of improvement to the guidelines, and that's essentially what Phase 1 was all about. As a result, a number of changes to guidelines and other documents have already been undertaken, and indeed HMAC in a teleconference last week with my colleagues or their representatives from around the country accepted the recommendations of the evaluation report and discussed a number of the changes to guidelines and other documents. But I understand that further details on these amendments will be provided to you in sessions later today, and I can advise that the recommendations that need now to be progressed to allow the system to commence on the 1st of January have or will be completed by that time. So we are good for go live, despite the fact that it is only a few weeks away. I'd also acknowledge that the report highlights that there is more to do post the 1st of January. It isn't all over then, and accordingly the National Regulatory System National Working Party Group, which is made up of both policy officials and registrars from the participating jurisdictions, will continue to work on the other recommendations contained in the evaluation report on behalf of HMAC, and again that was agreed to in our teleconference last week. This may also include continued work with the ACNC to review any opportunities to minimise the duplication of reporting between the ACNC and our national regulatory system. The finalisation of the system governance arrangements, as well as further work on communication and sector engagement, will be part of that process. I would like to conclude and note that these are exciting times for the community housing sector in Australia, and indeed certainly for chief executives and many of their staff in housing authorities around the country, because the introduction of the national regulatory system is really significant in the history of social housing in our nation, and it will assist the sector to take advantage of both present and future business opportunities by providing the assurance that the sector is so well governed and viable. I'd like to thank you all again for your involvement in the design and the testing of the national regulatory system, whether as members of the consultative forum, whether as Phase 1 participants or housing authority and registrar staff from the various states and territories. I look forward, as I'm sure all of you do, to the ongoing progress of the national regulatory system, which, as I've said, will contribute significantly to building a stronger and more viable community housing sector in our country, and importantly, play such an essential role in addressing the needs of those people who we are all here to help. I know, I'm sure all of you believe as passionately as I do that housing is the foundation from which we all lead the rest of our lives, and providing that to more members of our community, that stable and affordable accommodation, that essential foundation for life, is a very noble and worthwhile process and purpose. Thank you very much.